Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for June 3rd, 2025. Let me get straight to the point. The whole reason for this update this morning is to mobilize you to act, to get out and mobilize like hell. We've got to get across to the American people the dangers we face from a continuing legacy of what we call the collective Biden. And what we're referring to is the policies of the last administrations from Bush, from Obama, and Biden for confrontation with Russia, provocations, for regime change coups, for the imposition of the trading practices of the World Trade Organization, which have created a total international financial crisis. And the reaction to it from the establishment is war and chaos. And we saw the events this last weekend that brought us closer to war than we've been perhaps at least since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now there's a lot of talk out there about what happened. A lot of it is what was behind the drone attack on the Russian airfield. There are questions that are legitimate to explore. For example, did Trump know it was coming? Had he been briefed? And if he did, why not stop it in the interest of peace? But if he didn't know about it, why not? What does this say about the briefing process of the national security team around him? Now, I can't answer those questions right now. We're looking into it. There are a lot of people looking into it. But here's what we can say. The goal of Zelensky in planning this was to prevent any kind of rapprochement between Russia and the United States and to keep the war going. The idea of sabotaging the peace negotiations is at the center of the continuation of war, the arming of Ukraine, and so on. But most importantly, they want to stop the potential for the normalization of U.S.-Russian relations. And this is something that Trump is actually working on somewhat effectively. The second session of the talks in Istanbul took place yesterday. They weren't long. They came up with a couple of agreements to exchange some more prisoners, and they each presented their position papers, and they agreed to meet again in a week or two. Now, the really important issue here is the question of collaboration and ongoing conversation. Now keep in mind, there are threats, legitimate threats, that President Trump and President Putin are targeted for assassination. We saw it with two cases of an assassination attempt against Trump. It's fairly clear that the drone attacks on Putin's helicopter during his recent trip to the Kursk region was a possible assassination attempt. It's clear the establishment wants to get rid of Trump and Putin because their intent to have peace goes against the war drive that is seen as necessary from the standpoint of the establishment. And so any ongoing rapprochement is a threat to their idea of a new world order. Now, in this context, the fact that Rubio and Sergei Lavrov spoke yesterday, that's very important. We don't have a full report on that other than they're going to continue to talk. Now, one thing to keep an eye on is that German Chancellor Friedrich Merz from BlackRock and from the arms industry is coming to Washington this week to meet with President Trump. What would be very useful would be for Trump to tell him to end his commitment to supporting Ukraine. Will he do that? We don't know. That's the whole point of the mobilization. It's necessary that the president see the population moving against this commitment of his three predecessors for war. Now, as we've pointed out, the war drive comes from the collective Biden in the United States, which is essentially the Brzezinski networks, it's the Madeleine Albright networks, it was people like Blinken, Sullivan, but who are they speaking on behalf of? The so-called military-industrial financial complex. Those people who want war to continue at all costs. And seriously, that means at all costs, because those costs are essentially the tribute that they're able to scrape together that come out of the government's commitment to your health, your education, your protection. Instead, they want that money to go to the military-industrial complex, and therefore that means war. Now, the spokespeople for that war, you have them in the Congress. Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal, two senators from the United States, one Republican, one Democrat, were in Kiev promising more U.S. support for the war against Russia. You have the war hawks, as I said, in both parties in the Congress. They're in the media, everywhere throughout the media. You can't get an honest story of what's really going on from the media. They're in the academic institutions. They're in the think tanks. And they're deeply embedded in the executive branch of government. And they're the ones who, if there is a problem with the briefing of Trump, it's coming from these networks in the intelligence community, the defense community, the diplomatic corps, who are tied to the war establishment. And that's why it's necessary for the people to speak out against this. Now, when you're looking at the war establishment, you have to look across the sea to the United Kingdom. And Starmer yesterday continued with the lunacy and insanity of the idea that NATO is going to fight Russia in a war without the United States if necessary. Starmer had a three-point plan that he unveiled. One, Britain has to move to a war-fighting readiness. This is the same thing that the German former defense minister Pistorius said. Prepare to fight a war. And they're saying it will be with Russia by 2027 at the latest. Starmer's second point, strengthen NATO, which means more weapons to Ukraine. And the third point, accelerate innovation to a wartime pace. How about accelerating innovation to provide better health care for the people of the United Kingdom? How about accelerated spending to rebuild the infrastructure in the education system? No, the war is the number one concern for Starmer and his government. Now, same thing in the United States. Assuming President Trump is serious about peace, he's got to talk to Putin, and he's also got to talk to Netanyahu and tell Netanyahu no more weapons if you're going to continue to slaughter Palestinians. I'll have more to say on that tomorrow because there were some developments over the last 24 to 48 hours in which Israel is continuing to show a commitment to complete purge of Palestinians from Palestine. But Trump has the power to stop these wars. And he's, I think, making an effort, but it's necessary that he hears from the American people. Take the leaflet that's going to be linked in the description section. Read it, study it, and get it out. And make calls. You know, I was going to title today's discussion, Who You Going to Call? The question, since you can't call Putin and you can't call Trump probably, get to your congressman, get to your political associates, get to your neighbors, your co-workers, your fellow churchgoers, and create a mobilization of informed citizens for peace, for a new security architecture, and a new development architecture. That's the way out of this war. That's the way to take power away from the establishment oligarchy, which is committed to war for the purposes of their own private interests. So take the leaflet and move with it.